I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's class on chess tactics. As you know, tactics are little 3 to 8 move combinations to finish off a game after you've established an overwhelming position through brilliant positional and strategic play. So the tactics is the culmination of the game, typically. Now this first example is a very famous game by an American champion named Frank Marshall. Anyway, black to play and win, and without further ado, I'd like my audience to suggest the winning move for black. I'm sure that Ken has at least seen this game before. It's maybe not the younger people in the audience. Well, I believe Marshall was even before your time. Yeah. Who said Rook H3? You're right. Whoever said it, Rook H3. Have you seen this before? Okay. Now I'll make White's move. He tries to drive the queen away, and then he'll move the rook from c5 to c7 and threaten queen takes knight pawn checkmate. That's White's idea. Now the next move is the prettiest move of this whole combination, and Frank Marshall in his book wrote the spectators were so pleased with this combination they threw gold coins on the chessboard at the end of it. What is the move for black?
I know, so I won't answer.
Don't say, yeah.
Maybe knight on
Where would you like the knight to go?
to the white, near the white pawn.
F3 square, forking the queen?
E2.
E2, okay. All right, let's try it. Notice that the little pop-up screen says new variation. When that happens, that's a sign that this is not the official solution, because I keyed in the official solution. But this is it's a good try, but this isn't the right move.
You just put the answer out there.
You need to be quiet, Ken. Okay, who saw the answer? We'd like to take credit for it.
I know what it was beforehand because I've seen this game twice in the last 3 months.
Oh, okay. Does anyone who didn't see the answer know what the move is for black? Very pretty. I would never have seen it.
Can I get the answer now?
Go ahead. What's your answer?
Yes.
Queen to G3. And however White takes the queen, there's a checkmate. So if rook pawn takes, then you get your knight check, and that's checkmate, because the rook guards the H file. Okay. Now if this pawn takes, again, hold on. Check. This takes, new variation. Then the knight comes down check, forcing the king over, and rook takes rook is our checkmate. And last but not least, queen here. Again, the knight move. Over, knight takes queen check, the rook pawn's pin.
He takes and then rook takes rook again.
Rook takes rook. But I was puzzling because can we avoid mate by moving the king over? Ken? What's the move here? Maybe there isn't a mate here. You just do the knight check and you move the rook on H3 over to A3 and wipe out the A2 pawn. And you're going to be piece up and you're going to win some pawns on top of it. All right. Okay. Obviously, black is going to win this one because black has an open rook file. The rook is aiming toward h1, protected by the bishop. Black has to act fast, though. White has the queen that can do a check on a8. This is a very tricky combination. Black to play and checkmate white with a series of brilliant moves, almost all checks.
Yeah, I mean, if I can get rid of that knight on g3, it's made immediately.
Well, that knight's protected by a pawn. Would you like me to take it off the board?
Yeah, because then I'm going to mate with the rook on h1.
Let me say, don't be shy in sacrificing a rook in this position,
That's what I was looking at.
as a hint.
Rook h1,
Yeah, let's look at that.
Then the knight has to take.
and then bishop h2,
Yeah, bishop to h2, great, you saw that.
and then rook h8.
Oh, nice.
But we escape up here, now what happens?
Knight f5,
Yeah, now what?
rook h4,
Is that it? That's it.
Nice.
Very good.
Nice.
You solved it, I'm impressed. I thought it was trickier than that. Okay, let's see, who's winning this game? White's king's in a bad way, so is black's.
I think bishop to d4.
I would think that makes a lot of sense too. Well, let's see what the computer what it is. Oh, it is queen to c5. Now what's the follow-up move? Who said queen to c5? What's your follow-up move? That was good. Very good.
Nice. The knight check on e6.
That's coming, but I would suggest you save that for the mate. How can you draw the king to a mate with that knight to e6 move?
Bishop d4.
Yeah,
He has to take it.
that's the right sequence. Then he's stuck.
But can we go back a little bit?
Wait a minute, what's that e4 square? Oh, well, we have to continue. Now what's the move?
f3,
No, knight to g5.
but then he just goes
F3
goes to e5 then.
takes the pawn. Now what's the move?
Now g5.
Now g5 is
King here, and how do we check him now?
So
H3, back here, now what?
other knight.
That's it. We finally trapped him.
no, I have something.
So takes his, let's run through it again, it's kind of pretty. This is, by the way, not a game, as you might have guessed. It's a composition by some guy who put a nice composition together. I forget his name.
Okay, yeah.
Up. And the only square open is the white square on e4. Then the pawn comes up. He has to take the pawn. That knight comes up. He has to go here. The knight goes here, forcing him here. And we go here. And that's our checkmate.
Sacrifice the queen and the bishop.
Okay, let's look at this one.
Jason, what do you think I got, Arjun?
I think black is winning.
I think you're right, because black has those pawns shoved down white's king's throat, and white has no pieces that can even attack black.
Can't even move.
All white's pieces are behind his pawns, which is a horrible position. So black has to win. Any guesses? We won't spend a lot of time on it. I think this is a number of moves we would have to see, but anyone like to guess on the starting move? Anyone? I'm going to say, when in doubt, check the king, which would be pawn takes pawn check.
H takes g2, yeah.
The other possibility would be with the other pawn, g3 takes h2. But I like h3 takes that check, and then we can shove our knight up to h4 with check. So maybe something like that. Oh, wait a minute, it's white's move. Pawn takes, bishop here. Oh, look, a discovered attack by the rook.
He has to take it.
Go back to
He can go back. Oh, he takes. We'll go back after a bit. He takes it. Queen up. Now he's coming into our territory. So this is pretty easy.
Oh, yes.
Castles checkmate. I thought castles was a defensive move to get your king out of the center. Yeah. Let's go back. Here you go. White to move. We thought it was black. White plays h takes g3. Black takes with check. Here. King takes. Black throws the bishop up. He has to take the bishop or he loses the rook. Okay, now the knight discovers. We said what happens if he goes back to g2. Let's digress. Did you get what you needed, Jason?
Yeah, then the rook,
King back.
rook comes to h2.
No, knight to e3, check, forking the king and queen is better.
Oh, it's better, isn't it?
And you just take the queen and win that way. Okay, did everybody see what they wanted to see on this one? Okay. Okay. So what I forgot to tell you the theme of tonight is we get the king out from behind his pawns and we force him across the board and trap him. So that's what we're doing. We've got two more of these. All right, let's look at this one. It looks like maybe white is attacking. White has the only piece on the fifth row, which is a knight. Yeah, I remember this one. So who would like to make a guess at it, and then I'll just show it to you.
White is going to start.
White to play and win the game, and it's a very surprising move that white comes up with. The only way you can attack your opponent is to move your pieces forward. So there's not a piece that moves backward. No defensive moves by white. And you can't be afraid to sacrifice bishops or knights either.
That's what I was looking at. I don't see, it looks like that if I try and sack the knight on h7, he takes a knight.
Well, how about sacrificing the other knight that's lagging behind on h3?
Knight h3.
Well, let's look at knight to g5, and obviously the main line he has to take the knight, but we get to take the pawn, attacking the knight. We get the knight back. If he moves the knight, we open up the f file on that f2 pawn. Knight takes pawn or rook takes pawn probably leads to a winning attack.
What if he doesn't take?
Well, if he doesn't, we have two knights there attacking the f7 pawn, which he can't defend. So the knight that's being attacked by the pawn, the knight on g5 would take the f7 pawn, and that would be a one game right there. Black's position is destroyed. He has a isolated pawn on e6, and white's bishops and knights are aiming toward his king. He wouldn't last long. So pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn. Let's see what black does. Oh, he can't move the knight. We already talked about that. Knight takes pawn would threaten the rook, and the queen could also come up to h5 at some point. Or we could do rook takes pawn on f7, bring our queen up, and then we would threaten rook takes g pawn check, king takes queen to h6 check. Well, that might not win.
I think if he moves the knight, you can get.
Oh,
h5.
we can win the pawn. Yeah, queen to h5. Then we would threaten queen takes pawn check. And we would also be able to play at some point pawn to knight 6. And we can bring our rook up and slide it over to the h3 or h4 and finish the king off in the corner. All right. So he brings the reserve knight, the knight on f8, up to protect his knight on f6.
So he takes that knight?
No, he throws away his other knight. This is getting difficult. King takes. Okay. Oh yeah, the knight's pinned. So queen.
Pin. Oh my God.
Queen h5. Oh, even g6. Now we got to get our queen up there somehow, right? Oh, we have that e6 pawn looks juicy. Let's take that. Which way do you want to put your king, on f8 or h8?
F8, it's over.
How's it over?
Because in queen
Oh,
F8,
okay, so there's no choice. Now all we got to do is move our rook up and we can aim it to h4, right? We can go rook to f4 and go to h4, I think. Let's see. Nope. Oh, the bishop comes up and is going to replace the queen on e6 with check. Then the queen can go to h8 and finish black's king off from the back row.
Wow.
Knight covers the e6 square. And now what?
Bishop to e6 check.
That's got to be it.
And then the
Knight.
takes no. Oh, queen there.
He has to go over again. But we did clear up some wood that was defending the king, didn't we?
Check
Now
on
we-
h3 again.
I can't do rook to f4. The queen covers that square.
But you go queen to h3.
Knight F6.
Now what?
Rook takes knight.
Rook takes knight. Bishop takes, and finish him off, Ken.
a7.
Now what? Cut the king off with a rook move, and then we lower the boom with the queen move. So the only way he can block that for one move is moving the bishop up. Oh, now the bishop's pinned for that g7 pawn is free for the taking. We're not going to let him get away, are we? Who would have thought we'd end up checkmating him down on b2?
Wow.
Yeah, sure.
And so he had to see that over the board.
Well, he didn't have to see the whole thing because he could see that once he got the king up there, it was all over. He probably didn't see he might have. He's good enough to have seen it, but he didn't have to, is all I'm saying.
He knew that was king.
Obviously, white must have the king hunt somehow because the queen is on h5 and the white bishop is on d3, and the knight can take the bishop with check, just unleashing the bishop on the h2. This is pretty simple.
Yeah.
Who would like to give the winning move for white? Ken?
Knight takes bishop on f6. What?
That's a surprise. I thought knight takes bishop, bishop takes pawn check would win. Okay. Now we get double check. If he goes in the corner, there's a knight to g6's checkmate. Okay, Ken, what do we do now? I think I need your help on this one.
We will move the knight.
Which knight?
The E5 knight.
Yeah, let's check with that knight. It's got to be here. The king has to go here.
Now we pawn it?
Yep, it's got to be the pawn. That forces him here. And here. And here.
Bishop?
And here. Here. Here.
We cannot kill the bishop.
No, the king's protected.
Rook to h2. King here.
Castle.
Oh, yeah. Why not? Wait. No, it liked just, I don't see anything wrong with castles,
There, yeah.
but it liked the king up there.
Castle's better.
Yeah, castling would work too.
Unless you cut it.
Okay, so these were the exciting ones tonight. Now we're going to do some routine ones where we win a piece or something. Okay, so the unprotected piece, white to play and win. Let's point out the unprotected pieces in black's position. Who would care to elaborate on that for us?
The bishop on C2.
Bishop on C2, what else? Both rooks. The now, you know, when you have two unprotected pieces and the queen looks to attack both of them. So that white queen in no way is going to attack that unprotected rook on AA, right? It's impossible.
Oh, the queen to C3.
After he
But you got to get the sequence of the moves right, Ken.
Well, he moves the bishop, then I push the pawn.
you could push
And then he moves the rook.
Ah!
Oh, by the way, who do you think white was? It was the only other American world champion besides Bobby Fischer. Paul Morphy back in 1858. He was mopping up one of his opponents in this game. You guys got all the moves. All you got to do is put them in the right order. One is the pawn shove. One is the queen move. You could move the rook, but where would you move the rook? Well, then the bishop goes to f5 and the bishop's protected and you don't have two unprotected pieces any longer. Bishop to f5, the knight can take it, but the pawn can take back. Now that doesn't mean black might be lost because of his bad pawn position, but that's not what we're getting at here. There's a straight out win of a piece here. Or a winning attack if somehow black can not lose the piece. Okay, so we said queen to c3, the bishop moves, right? And Ken's idea was queen to c3, and then we do the pawn shove, right? How about inverting the order? Do the pawn shove first. Then you can threaten both pieces at one time, and the pawn threatens to break black's pawn position with pawn takes pawn check. King would have to take, and the king is open for further attacks. So that's the idea. Of course, Paul Morphy, the world champion, saw it. Bishop back, the only move, he had to go to a protected square. Now pawn takes, he can't do queen takes, he has to do king takes. Now the queen here, hitting the f5 pawn. Queen here, rook here, rook here, rook here. Now, rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, queen takes pawn doesn't cut it because there's rook takes pawn check at the end, attacking the king and queen.
But if rook takes, you pin it with queen to c3. And then win.
So he moves his king up to protect the pawn. White brings the other rook over, threatening rook takes rook, forcing black to do rook takes rook. And now do we do pawn takes rook or rook takes rook? I think we do rook takes rook. So you see the black king is in a weak spot, isn't it? It's not covered by pawns, but white's king has some difficulty too. If the black rook could come to d1, that would be a checkmate. So white needs to move the queen, and he could go to g3 check, move that rook pawn up to h3. That would give the king an out. Then white can continue his attack. That's what happens. So rook comes down, threatening mate, check. King back there, now h up, and we have our white's king is now safe, but black's king is still exposed. Let's just run through the solution. Black played up here to guard the second row. White played here to double the rook and queen on that file, and maybe the rook will go up to e8 at some point, or the rook will go to e6 and attack the queen from e6. he put the pawn up here. I guess he's just evening out his pawn position. He's taking away the c5 square from the white pieces. Now the white king moves up, so there's no checks on the back rank before he does something decisive. He moves that pawn up. The queen drops back here, attacking the a6 pawn and threatening to go queen to h5, once again threatening the pawn on f5. Queen came over. Now the rook goes to e6, queen back, and now queen here. The queen and rook are on the f5 pawn. No, just the queen's on the pawn. So he brings the rook up to protect the pawn.
Rook takes rook.
He does pawn here.
Wow.
Now black plays pawn up here. White takes the pawn. Black retreats here. He wants to trade rooks. Looks like he's surviving. Queen takes pawn check. Queen here. Queen takes rook here, and white won the ending. It wasn't a brilliant checkmate, but white won the ending.
He just mops up.
Yeah. But actually, the computer says,
The very first move, if you go to
I got to tell you what the computer says. Let's go run through it one more time. So it's here. Bishop here, takes, king takes, here, 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 rook here, takes, here, check, pawn here. Black could have equaled the position here, according to the computer. It's not in my book. So my author said, he said, you know, they like to say, and white won with a strong kingside attack. That's what he said. But the computer says black can equalize in this position. So let's see. Oh yeah, here's the note. Rook takes e5, and the author's note in the book says, and white won by his kingside superiority. But notice I have an equal sign next to it. That's the computer evaluation. So rook here's fine. Here. Oh, by the way, king to f7 leads to equality after h3. See, f7's better. It's toward the middle of the board. It's better than the corner. And instead of going to d7 defending, black can make use of his pawn on c6 to try to trade rooks, and the rook indirectly protects his pawn on f5. This is the right defensive idea. White has nothing better than here pinning the rook, threatening to win a pawn, and then black lets the b7 pawn go, but he protects the rook with the queen, and if the white queen takes the b7 pawn, then white wins. Rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, and he has queen takes pawn, protecting his c7 pawn, and then he'll get a perpetual check against the open king. So it should have been a draw. Anyway, we're going to have to wrap it up because there's another lesson in a few minutes. So we'll stop here. Thanks for coming.